Good evening and welcome to the Fairy Tale Addict. Today, what I'll be talking about is Cinderella. And she just so happens to be a 510A persecuted heroine. You probably have no idea what that means. That's okay. It's just terminology that there were some people who had nothing better to do with their lives than to categorize fairy tales, and 510A just so happens to be the categorization for stories where there's a heroine who is persecuted and comes out on top. You know, the typical rags to riches story. Anyway, with Cinderella, I figured what we'd want to do is start off with the silly stuff in stories. So, first of all, there are a couple of things in the Cinderella stories, and some of the main ones that we know, that really just kind of bother me, because he's like, what on earth? For example, you dance an entire night with a girl and you don't ask her name. An entire night. You dance with her and you know, some of the stories, it's 3 consecutive nights. You dance with this girl and you don't think to ask her name? Really? And then you think she's pretty enough that you want to marry her. You know, it's just grand and all, but you don't remember what she looks like. So you have to use the shoe that she dropped behind as ID? What? I mean, really? And is that really the best way to identify a woman? I mean, a woman can have small feet and not be very... Never mind. Anyway, I think that's rather ridiculous, and I really, really wouldn't want to live in a kingdom that is ruled by someone who chooses his wife by her shoe size. Really? Now, as I was complaining about this to my younger siblings, what was really funny was my 14-year-old brother said, "Oh, there's a really easy explanation for all this. He was drunk. That's why he didn't think to ask her name and doesn't remember what she looks like." So, you know. Anyway, so that's one silly thing there. Now the second one is people thinking that Cinderella is her given name. You know, whether that's people who are reading the stories or people in the stories. I mean, really, what loving parent would name their child Cinderella? It sounds really pretty nowadays, because you're like, oh, because you have all the romanticism attached to the name, but the reason she's called Cinderella is because her name was Ella, and she slept in the cinders, in the ashes. The different stories, a lot of like the German one that, the version that the Brothers Grimm come across in about 1812, when they collected in 1812, it's called Aschenputtel, because she sleeps in the ashes. And it's not supposed to be a pretty name. And then people thinking, yeah, anyway. Now glass slippers. With that one, you know, it's entirely possible to make glass shoes, but to dance an entire night in them and to travel to and from your home to a ball, and there's a bunch of people around and things, people are probably pretty clumsy in their big huge ball gowns and everything. Safety hazard much? Really? I mean, you're going to walk around with pieces of glass on your feet. That's not smart. Not that fairy tale characters are smart all the time or anything, but, you know. And then in different versions of the story, you know, trying to fit your foot into the shoe, doing horrific things to them like chopping off your toes or your heels, reasoning that, oh, well, if I get my foot into the shoe, then I marry the prince and then I never have to walk again. No. Just because I personally, I don't know if I have my priorities wrong or anything, but really, marrying a prince is more important than being able to walk. And, yeah, silly stuff in stories. And then relying on someone else to be in charge of your fate is just, I know it may be more of a modern concept where, you know, we have to do stuff you actually have to put forth effort to be able to get rewarded for things, or, you know, to be able to accomplish things, you have to do stuff. But I was literally actually reading what the what the moral of the story to one of the Cinderella stories was. It was the Charles Perrault version, which is like close to the very end of the 1600s, early 1700s is when that one was collected and written down by Charles Perrault. And that one, literally the moral of the story was that you can work really hard and you can be really pretty and you can be really kind and everything, and it still might not be enough without the help of a godparent. All right, if that's the moral you want to teach your kids, I guess. Okay, anyway, that's a lot of the silly stuff in the stories that I pull up and just talk about. Because some of that stuff is really kind of stupid if you think about it. Now, what I'm going to move on to is the archetypes and the motifs and things that are in the Cinderella story that are actually in a lot of other stories as well, and that we've actually been able to identify and actually label them. So the first thing, I mentioned this at the beginning of the video, is it's called a 510A, persecuted heroine story. Because in probably the most significant point of the Cinderella story is the fact that the main character, she is a heroine who is persecuted and has to overcome trials to be able to have a happier life, which generally involves marrying a prince, which apparently was, one of the only ways to get out of your house back then was to, get away from your family's household. What you had to do was get married and get put into a different household. Anyway, the next one is almost all the stories have some sort of, there's animal allies or they're helpful and everything. For example, the Disney version, which is highly based off of the Charles Perrault version, which you'll probably come to see that I don't like the Charles Perrault version all that much. Anyway, in the Disney version, you have all the little birds and the mice and everything who help clean her, wash her hair or wash her back and everything, make her a dress, and they're willing to be turned into horses so they can pull a pumpkin carriage. That's the typical animal ally. Now, in the Brothers Grimm version, she does have some birds that help her when her stepmother does. When she gives her a trial, saying, if you can, she takes a pot of lentils, throws them into the ashes, and says, if you can sort those out before the time of the ball comes, then yeah, you can come with us. Yeah. And so what Cinderella does is she gets her little birdie friends to come, and they pick out the lentils from the ashes. And unfortunately, her stepmother is a liar as well, and even though she did have it sorted out, won't let her come. And later on in the Brothers Grimm version, the birds do end up pecking the eyes out of her wicked stepsisters. I don't know why they don't pick out the eyes of the wicked stepmother, though, because she's kind of the one who's mostly responsible. But anyway, then one of the themes that goes through the story is kindness is rewarded and cruelty is punished. For example, one of the things that one of the biggest things in almost all the stories is that the Cinderella character is good. She is kind, she is patient, and she endures a lot of stuff. Her mother dies, and then her father remarries, and she endures the abuses of a wicked stepmother, and is able to come out on top. And so that kindness and that goodness being rewarded is a thing that I think a lot of people really identify with, and we want that to be the way the world works, even if it doesn't always. That's how we want it to work. And then cruelty is punished. You have the stepsisters who are not kind at all, and in some of the versions in the Brothers Grimm version, the sisters end up getting their eyes pecked out at the wedding. Oh joy! And in the Chinese version, Ye the stepsisters and the stepmother end up getting stoned to death. Cheerful. But, so there's that typical thing there. That also happens in lots of stories, but that is one thing that is notable in most of the different versions of that. The wicked stepmother is very prominent in almost every story. And so one of the oldest versions written down, as I said, is the Ye-Shen, the Chinese version, and it was actually written down in about 850 AD, And it has been noted that it was actually already old at the time, so that story had been around for quite some time already. But that one, the Ye Shen, the main character, the Cinderella character, her mother dies, and her father ends up remarrying, and so the stepmother is that typical stepmother. In fairy tales, stepmothers are never nice. And because she feels like there's some competition between her and her daughters and her husband's daughter, and then having a power struggle basically, and feeling threatened by her, and so puts her down, abuses her, and you keep thinking, why did the father let this happen? Different stories take care of this in different ways, either saying like, well, I think in the Disney version, the dad dies, I think. At least it's implied. You never see him after that little intro where it talks about where Cinderella comes from and everything. In Into the Woods, her father is a drunk and is pretty much useless. But a lot of the stories, they don't really actually define when they come out. Now, for the opera version that Rossini does of that one, it's kind of funny because it's not a stepmother, it's a wicked stepfather, and which kind of throws you for a bit. But I think that's kind of because they wanted to have, because in operas the villains are almost always bases, and so they had to make the bad guy male so that it can be bass, because it would just be awkward having a bass playing the wicked stepmother. Anyway, there's that right there with the wicked stepmother. Now there's always in each of these stories there's always a mentor or like someone who guides them or something. So in the Chinese version, Ye Shen, she has her magical fish, who ends up, who provides for her and gives her food and everything, as her wicked stepmother is depriving her of basically her necessities of life. And even when the wicked stepmother finds out about the magical fish and kills it, the bones, Ye Shen is able to keep the bones and still make requests for things. And so there's the guidance there. In Aschenputtel, the Brothers Grimm version, that one, there's the tree that grows on her mother's grave, watered by her tears, cheerful, and that tree provides the dress and the shoes and the guidance to be able to help to go to the ball. In the Charles Perrault version, there is the fairy godmother who provides everything for her, because in the Charles Perrault version, Cinderella is a whiny crybaby and just doesn't do squat besides I want to go to the ball. I'm sorry. Okay. And there are other versions where there's an African version where she ends up going to the king of the frogs or toads, and they hardly ever. There's always someone there to help guide her, help provide some aid. And so that's a motif or an archetype of the mentor. And then there's the disguise. Disguise is really big in this. It's almost always that Cinderella character dressing up or disguising herself as someone coming out of the ordinary and dressing up as someone extremely beautiful and going to festivals or going to the ball or whatever it is in that story. And there's always a transformation in that disguise. So that's another one. And it's almost always either a one-night deal or a three-night deal. So there's either just one night that there's a festival or something, or there's actually 3 consecutive nights. And 3 is a big number. 3 is very symbolic in lots of different things. If you notice, the number 3 is, third time's a charm. It also can symbolize. It also is the number 3 symbolizes male, where number 4 symbolizes female. So I don't know what you want to read into with that, but then there's shoes. The shoes. I don't know what it is with the shoes, but in almost every Cinderella story, there's something to do with shoes. There are some exceptions, of course, but in Ye Shen, there's the that version. Her shoe, she accidentally loses it, and then like this king or warlord, or depending on the phrasing, he ends up finding it and is enchanted by this little shoe, and then then you have Aschenputtel with Brothers Grimm, where it's a golden slipper. Then you have the Charles Perrault version, which is either a glass slipper or a fur slipper. The Disney version, pulling off of the Charles Perrault, does have that. The glass slipper has become the most prominent in almost all the versions nowadays that you see. For example, you have the Rodgers and Hammerstein, the musical version, glass slippers, so you have the Disney glass slippers. You have Ella Enchanted, glass slippers, and so it just, the shoes are really big on that. Now, the significance of these stories, I think why people like this story so much. It is one of the most prominent stories ever. Everyone likes it, and I think it's because everyone likes to have that idea of I can get something big out of life. It doesn't matter where I come from or what I've been through. It doesn't matter that I sleep in the cinders, in the ashes. I can dress up really beautiful and go to a ball and marry a prince. I can get out of my situation and out of this darker situation and this abusive home life. I can get to some place better. I think that's probably what is so attractive about it. And it's kind of sad that a lot of the versions that have become more prevalent are the ones where the Cinderella character doesn't do much. She is dependent on other people, and this, I think, plays into a lot of what we have come to be nowadays. We're very entitled, and we feel that we should have a fairy godmother who should provide for us. That we just have to be nice, but no, we need to be proactive. We need to come up with solutions for things, and there are some of the versions where the Cinderella character wants to go to the ball, but is able to come up with the dress and everything, but also has to be careful of not being caught, and so has to have ways to distract people. Like there's an Italian version where she ends up like when the king sends out servants to find her and find where she lives, what she does is she throws gold coins, kind of like Atlanta with the golden apple, having that thrown, and she's distracted by that. But throwing the gold coins to distract the servants, so they go pick those up and not find out where she is. And so it's slightly frustrating to me that we now look at it as more of an entitlement thing. And yes, I think it's nice to be able to hope for the chance to be able to get out of bad situations and you have something better out of life. But one of the reasons why I prefer some of the older ones is because and the ones that aren't quite as well known now is because the Cinderella character, she's much stronger, and she tries to take care of herself. So that is my little take on Cinderella. So I do want to give a few recommendations of different versions of the story. One of my favorites of all time, I mentioned this in the last episode, was Ella Enchanted by Gail Carson Levine. I adore that version of the story, and a lot of it is because the Ella, and the main character, she's very strong, and she has to go through a lot, but she's the one ultimately who is able to change her circumstances. And then there is I do love Into the Woods, which is a musical by Stephen Sondheim, and the Cinderella in that one, she grows a lot in having to learn that. That one pulls more off of Aschenputtel, the Brothers Grimm version, and those are two of my favorite versions. And there's another really, really interesting version that is the second book in a series by Jessica Day George, and it's called Princess of Glass. It is probably one of the creepiest versions of Cinderella that I have ever read, and it's really, really good. It is the second book in a series. The first one is actually it has some characters from the first book, which is a retelling of the 12 Dancing Princesses, another one of my favorite stories. And so that's everything for today, and hopefully for next week I will do a different fairy tale and Next week it will be a surprise. I'm actually going to try and decide which one would be best. And if you guys have any suggestions of versions of Cinderella that I should read, put them in the comments. I would love to hear your recommendations because I always love a good Cinderella story. And so thank you very much. If you have any questions, once again, ask questions in the comments, and I will see you next week.